So we'll welcome everyone to our session today. My name is Beverly. I'm with the School of Professional and Extended Studies. I'm here with Mohamed Nimer from SPExS as well, and Steele from the School of Education. Unfortunately, Rinehart is not going to be able to join us today. He has the flu. He was sick for a few days, and so he said there's just no way he can make it. We're probably better off without him here if he is. But definitely want to welcome everyone here. What we want to do today is talk a little bit about teaching research methods online. I think it's applicable to an online environment and a face-to-face environment, but rather than us just speaking at you the whole time, what we would like is to get some ideas from you as well, to hear what's worked in your classroom so that we can make this more of a discussion rather than us just talking to you, so that we can share some ideas, because I think we've probably all had some challenges and some successes in teaching research methods. I teach qualitative methods. Mohamed teaches quantitative methods, and Jennifer teaches, well, she was involved in the launch of the online program for the School of Education. So we're coming at this from different experiences. Jeff was going to talk about the SRP process and mentoring SRP students. So that's something I think the three of us can also weave into our conversations as well. Each of us will talk for about 5 to 8 minutes, and then we'll open it up for discussion. I'm told by the conference planners that we should finish up at about noon. There are more people at Ann Farron this year than usual, and in the interest of everyone getting lunch, I'm told that we should probably try to finish up a little bit early. So, and I realize that was just recorded. So, we don't want to learn. We're not here for the free food. When I started to think about teaching research methods online, or teaching research methods in general. The first class that I taught, the first class that was my own, where I prepared my own syllabus, was an ethnographic research methods, and it was in January of 1998. So I've been doing this for about 20 years, and like we were talking about this morning, my teaching methods have evolved over the course of the last 2 decades. I think using more technology now, thinking about Skype interviews rather than face-to-face interviews, that's been a part of the evolution of my thinking in terms of teaching research methods. But as I look at the challenges that my students in qualitative methods face, I came across 2 broad challenges that I find in teaching my students. And this is in a face-to-face and an online environment. The first challenge is that it's very difficult for my students to grasp the fundamentals of research design. So it's hard for students, particularly undergraduates, but some graduates as well, to grasp the fundamentals of what evidence they need to support a particular claim, and how that evidence will be linked to a particular claim of causation. They're not looking at their data and their analysis to tell a story, but particularly my undergraduate students look at the data to prove a point that they already have. So as an instructor, I need to get students to think differently about crafting that research design. I say in my classes, this is the first and probably the hardest step of your research, finding a topic, but then crafting that design so that you are saying something meaningful, and you're not just pulling together research to prove something or to talk about something that you think you already know. We need to find research questions and address the hypothesis. We need to collect and analyze qualitative data to do this. And on a surface level, since I teach qualitative methods, it's really difficult for my students to come up with a qualitative research question. I ask them, send me your topic. Let's think about a qualitative research question. And 9 times out of 10, it's what is the impact of X on Y? Or what caused this? And I say, well, how are you going to answer that qualitatively? Well, and they can't address that. They're not familiar with that research design process. And at the same time, I think a lot of students try to fit qualitative methods into a quantitative box. And that's related to not having adequate training in qualitative methods and not having adequate training in quantitative methods, but it's also the nature of qualitative inquiry, I think. And many of our disciplines have focused on the merits of quantitative inquiry for decades. And so trying to get students to think differently, what can qualitative methods do for me? What can qualitative methods explain is my first challenge. Now, semester after semester, students will find two variables for their research projects. And they'll say, well, these variables changed at the same time, so they must be related. And part of that is breaking that apart as well and saying, well, what can qualitative methods give us in terms of causation? What can they give us in terms of those causal mechanisms? Just because we have two variables that change together doesn't mean that they're intricately linked. Doesn't mean that we can find that causation. I had a student last semester that did a paper on agricultural production in Ethiopia. And he argued that because the U.S. changed its policy, agricultural production in Ethiopia declined. Well, in reality, it's because there was a drought in Ethiopia. That's why it declined. But he hadn't thought past this monolithic, the U.S. had this terrible agriculture policy. So I sat with that student and I said, well, maybe it could be something different. So rather than talk about the drought, I thought about something that would be completely absurd and say, well, let's think about Pokemon cards. Are there more Pokemon cards in Ethiopia today than there were 10 years ago? So we look it up online, yes, there are. Well, maybe it's because of the Pokemon card. And he just looked at me like I had 3 heads. And I said, well, that's exactly what you're doing. You're finding these two variables and linking them together when they really have absolutely no relationship. So, that being said, one of the things, I don't want to mess up your, there we go. One of the things that I have written about is qualitative methods in monitoring and evaluation. I have a series of methods, qualitative methods online that I write about different methods, and I can talk about that a little bit later. But one of the things I talk about with my students when I start a research methods class is this idea of causal mechanisms and golf balls. So I start class by saying, well, I'm going to throw a question out there that we probably can't answer today, but let's think about how many golf balls are up in the air at this very moment in the state of Florida. And everybody looks at me and they they get on their electronic devices and they say, well, I can't figure this out. Well, of course you can't figure this out, but what data do we need to be able to answer that question? And we go through and put this article here because I've written a little bit about this. One of the things that this whole process, it's the research process that's important. So we talk about, well, maybe we can know how many golf courses there are in Florida and what is their capacity and how busy they are and what is the weather at that time of year and what time of day is it. We can answer all of those things, but then what about all those golf balls that are up in the air from children playing with golf balls or people playing with golf balls in their backyard? Defining the universe of golf balls, defining what it means to be up in the air for a golf ball. That research process, that thinking through the research process is a good way for students to start to consider those design challenges. But, and I probably have to speed up a little bit, I think that design also comes in, it can't be pushed into that one or those two research methods classes that students take. It's something that we all have to be doing, I think, in every class that we take, every class that we teach, rather. When we assign an article, ask your students, well, what evidence was used in this article to support this claim? Not all students are going to be producers of research, but we're all consumers of research, and we should all be able to look at those articles and say, well, who wrote this? When did they write it? What were their unconscious biases? What discipline did they come from? What cultural conflicts were taking place when this article was written? What evidence did they use? Did they use Pokemon cards? Did they talk about trade policy in the U.S., or did they look at, well, Ethiopia had a pretty bad drought that year, and so that's why it's agricultural production. So to try to get into this design, I think is something that we need to do better as a university. And I will speed it up a little bit. The second challenge that I find relates to the teaching the collection of data methods. I teach qualitative methods, qualitative data collection methods. It's not a design class, mainly to evaluation students. We have developed a class that is very engaging, and I will pull it up. This is a different platform. This is one of the Wiley courses, so it's going to look a little bit differently than Blackboard. But what this course does within this 8 weeks is to teach the nature of qualitative inquiry, to talk about qualitative research questions and coding, but then it takes an ethnographic or an anthropological perspective in that from week 3 to week 8, the topics are building upon each other. So that I teach observation and participant observation. Students partner with an organization in their local community to conduct this observation and participant observation. They do an unstructured interview. That unstructured interview is informed by the observation and participant observation that they do. They do a structured interview, or a semi-structured interview. They do a focus group. They use a participatory tool like a mapping exercise as part of their focus group. And then they analyze their data. In this way, when we're approaching students online, we found that you can't just talk about doing interviews, or you can't just talk about doing participant observation, that students have to actually carry it out themselves in practice. So part of teaching this course is actually mentoring students in that research process. There's a lot of individual time that I take with students as they're developing their qualitative research question, as they're going through, as they're using all of these methods. One of the challenges that we find in teaching qualitative methods course, or teaching this course online, is students come in thinking it's really easy to use qualitative methods. I can talk to people. I'm a great conversationalist, so I can do interviews. And that connection is not always there. So trying to get students to be more introspective and critique themselves. All of these research projects the students will submit online, and then they do self-critique of each other. So when they do their unstructured and their semi-structured interviews, they actually tape themselves, they provide the transcripts, and then in partners, they critique each other on this. They self-critique and then critique each other. And it really helps them to develop those skills. But before that happens, I teach them a little bit about research methods themselves. I'll show a video quickly, and then I think we probably have to move on. So when we discuss doing interviews, we did a controlled practice exercise. This is an interview that was taped. Our Wiley partners taped it with an organization called Grow Pittsburgh. And what we did was I interviewed the executive director of Grow Pittsburgh in what was a mock interview where I made lots and lots of mistakes. The students watch this and then they critique it. So I'll play a little bit here.
Yeah, Beverly Peters. It's great to be here and to meet you finally. And to be here on a day when it's not snowing outside, I thought the winter would never end this year. I know, we felt the same way, and actually it was so cold I wasn't sure if we'd get our siblings out of the greenhouse and into the ground in time. Oh, wow. Yeah, well, thanks again for hosting me. It's great to be here.
So I'll skip ahead.
Pittsburgh, and that kind of work that you ways. We have an edible school outcome work on our sites and assist us in the actual growing of food. So
those that have been with the School of Communication, you might recognize the person I'm interviewing.
Going back to our previous,
it's Julie Pizzino. She graduated probably 15 years ago or so.
Discussion about challenges. You mentioned weather and pests as something that you face in the gardens. And that gets me thinking, maybe just using pesticides work and be a quick and easy fix to this problem? Absolutely not. Pesticides are really terrible for humans and for the environment. And Pittsburgh is an entirely organic-based organization. We don't ever use pesticides. They've been known to cause cancer in humans, and also they're terrible for the soil. So they're really ruining the environment. And I would just never consider that.
So one of the points of this video is to really come up with the absurd. And so it's a 5-10 minute video. It's a 6-minute video. So we pinpointed, or I pinpointed, areas where students were having problems doing interviews, asking double-barreled questions, asking confusing questions, asking leading questions, not knowing enough about the organization to ask about the use of pesticides. And students watch this and then they critique it, but it helps them before they do their interviews to be able to conduct better interviews. And it's surprisingly enough, when students do their self-critique later on, they said, I watched this interview with Dr. Peters and I thought it was completely absurd, but I did the same thing in my interview. I can't believe that I did that. And so it is a self-reflecting process. Now, we've got these set up for the different, their observation, participant observation, all the different mistakes that I make. I recognize that we can't all do this. We don't all have a Wiley partner, but there's tons of information on YouTube. You can pull up lots of different interviews that are equally as bad as this one and be able to critique them with your students. I'll tell one funny story and then we can move on to Mohamed. When we did these Wiley videos, colleagues were sending them to other colleagues to comment on. And one of the deans in our department didn't read or didn't receive the little email that kind of explained what this was. And I got a very sheepish email from Don Blahoviak saying, you know, Bev, you were really off your game that day. I don't think you should use this in class. Well, you know, this actually was, I was trying to be off my game when I particularly was pretty bad that day. But yeah, just talking a little bit about qualitative methods, some of the challenges that we have. Mohamed's going to talk about quantitative methods next, and then maybe we can open it up and have some more conversation and dialogue.
You want me to go there? I can go there. The computer moves. Yeah. Let's see. All right. Okay. In the benefit of time, I'm just gonna go through these slides very quickly. I teach quantitative methods for graduate students who happen to have full-time positions, and they're very busy. They have their own families and their private lives, but they come because of what we have to offer in this class. In terms of designing the course and teaching it, I ask myself 3 core questions. Who are my students? And this is actually what happened, and this is what developed the course and the way we have been teaching this course. Who are my students? What do they need? And what value I should deliver to them? So our students are usually mid-career professionals. They come in with various levels of skill in quantitative methods, and some with what is called statistics anxiety, if you will. And but they come in, they want job-relevant quantitative skills because they know it's marketable. It allows them to get promoted or get better jobs. So what I do with these students who come have a great degree of self-direction. They know what they want. They're willing to collaborate. I act as a facilitator and participant in their learning community. So the whole concept of teaching here is collaborative learning, and because this is quantitative skills, sometimes I mean, if you don't know how to perform a regression model, then you just cannot proceed. And so there is right and wrong in this enterprise. So I sometimes, for the more challenged students, find myself acting as a tutor. So in designing the course and deciding what material should be included, I actually looked at the type of quantitative stuff that is done at their workplace. They come from USAID, other government agencies, the World Bank, NGOs, consulting firms, and so I looked at the material they are likely to produce once they have these skills, and decided that we actually have to cover the full cycle of qualitative research, all the phases from asking, from developing an evaluation question to proposing hypotheses up to analyzing and writing and visualizing reports on their findings. So this is the course. There, I don't know, this is not showing on the left side. Okay, well, this is the course. On the left side, it doesn't show here, but it should have all the 8 weeks. Basically we discuss proposing an evaluation question and hypothesis, dealing with developing a sample, administering a survey questionnaire. That's the data collection part, and then coding their variables, putting them on SPExS, and then for the second half of the session, they use both descriptive and inferential statistics, including regression and analysis of variance, to keep testing their hypothesis and reflecting on which tests work best for the type of research question they are pursuing. Okay, and so how the way we teach it, and this actually developed in 2 phases. And last year, Stephanie Brookstein actually revamped the course and added some collaborative techniques in terms of learning. And so busy students, different levels of skill. So we have assignments at multiple formats. Some of them all the class interacts. Some of them small groups, especially when it comes to offering them sharing feedback on their rough draft of their work, and then ultimately at the end of the week they have to submit the key assignment in terms of how to apply the phase of quantitative research that we are covering that week to their research project, if you will. And of course, the research project is developed and facilitated by their affiliation with an organization they're working with. It's either their employer or an NGO or a community organization that they're evaluating an aspect of their business. So there are different formats in which they get to learn. In the whole class, I act as a facilitator. I sum up their ideas and the review of the material. Obviously, that there are readings, and there are lynda.com type tutorials that they review, and I have my own video clips also they review, and they interact, and they add up their own professional experience to the mix. Sometimes I respond to them individually. In the peer-to-peer feedback, when they offer each other feedback, I just look for any red flags, and sometimes I send them private emails. Don't want to embarrass somebody with a mistake they're doing, and just offer general advice on where to go with things. And of course, in the individual practice exercises, I kind of tend to be a little bit very direct and sometimes even blunt. When there's a mistake, you have to call it because the technical part of learning. Now, how do I deal with their statistics anxiety? I tell them, well, don't worry about the math. SPExS will do it for you. And on the right side, that's SPExS, and that's the icon there. And thanks to the virtual computing lab, students have access to SPExS or other statistical software, which we don't mandate SPExS, but it's the most user-friendly program. That's why I use it. And but I stress that while SPExS will do the computations for you, you have to understand what those statistical measurements and functions mean, how they are generated, and how they fit or don't fit in the type of research question that you are trying to ask. Thank you.
I'm excited to build on the conversations of Beverly and Mohamed, because they really are very well integrated. So Beverly talked about the challenges. So Beverly talked about the challenges of helping students understand that correlation is not causation, and Mohamed talked about helping students learn software and learn technical aspects. So our course in qualitative and quantitative research methods for our master's students in education policy and for our master's students in international training and education incorporates both of those in one course. So this is a fall introductory research methods course, and I'll show you a little bit. Well, I'll talk about it in the slides in a second. It's a qualitative and quantitative introductory course, first semester in their 1.5 to 2 year master's program. These are working professionals. Many of them are teaching across the city in really challenging schools, and these are kids, a lot of our students, very passionate about education reform, education policy, and education equity. And what we try to do in our program is give them the tools and language of policy so that they can have that larger impact on policy. And research methods, being able to understand them and talk about them in a sophisticated way is really a big part of that. So, so I have a course that I have been teaching since 2014, and it's gone through many iterations. It's called Overview of Qualitative and Quantitative Research Methods, and it's called, the number is EDU 610, so it's always been for master's students. What I was asked to do this past summer is convert it to an online course because we partnered, School of Education partnered with Noodle about 1 year ago exactly to bring 3 of our master's programs online, Ed Policy and Leadership, which is really a booming program even on the ground. Teacher Ed, which is we do at the undergrad and grad level, this is our grad program, and Special Ed. So we crunched through the summer. The faculty developed 5 courses for a fall launch. It's a very fast process. I adapted the Introductory Methods course, and I should say this Introductory Methods course leads to a quant course in the spring that is optional for these students. We're building that online too. We have an adjunct instructor who's taking that one online, but I teach the ground course of the quant class as well. So some of the stats stuff like data and some true statistics we teach in spring, but we teach introduction to the concepts in fall. So we launched in fall. I didn't teach the course, but I supervised an adjunct who has a PhD in education but does not know quantitative methods. So always a challenge in the mixed methods course. And then this semester, the program's really growing. I'm going to be supervising 2 instructors, one who's a quantitative methodologist and the other is a qualitative methodologist. So, so I haven't taught this myself, but nevertheless, I have a pretty good understanding of how it went. So the course, it has synchronous and asynchronous components. And this is, of course, different from the ground course where pretty much everything is synchronous. Yes, they do work at home, but in the ground course, most of the work is done in our 2.5-hour classes every week, and then they do projects at home. In the online course, the readings, of course, are asynchronous. They have one technical research article a week and a methods chapter a week. I use a research methods for public administrators book. They have reading quizzes every week, which I have not done as a mandatory thing in the ground class. They have threaded discussion boards some weeks, especially to talk about their research projects. We did do some automated slides with voiceovers because I do a lot of work with slides in the class. We tried to convert those to voiceover slides, and it wasn't a huge hit. Okay, and it was costly. And then we have Excel data analysis assignments. So I teach them first to do data analysis in Excel, which they actually find quite challenging. Some of them have used Excel in sophisticated ways before, but most have not. So I feel like Excel, everybody should know, and then stats, it will help you in your career, but we have not decided that all of our students need to learn Stata, but I really feel that all of our students need to learn Excel in a pretty sophisticated way, just to have almost any job today in policy. Okay, so the synchronous component is interesting. We have live 110-minute instead of 150-minute in ground. It's 110-minute live every week in Zoom, which lets all the students see each other. The professor can see all of them. They can speak, and it's almost like being there in person. They know each other. They do chit-chat at the beginning of class. So that's been really interesting. Students lead discussions of the readings every week. Small group leads the whole group in a discussion. The instructor does guided practice with Excel in this live session, and increasingly, the instructor does conceptual synthesis and mini lessons. We had initially conceived of this as more of the lecture stuff would just be async with the voiceover slides, but what we realized is that we couldn't get away from students wanting more live lecture because they didn't feel like they were getting it on their own just from readings and just from the voiceover lectures. So that's really important. That's a big takeaway. And then the core assessments are the students lead a discussion of a research article, and then they're graded on how well they helped others understand the technical aspects of the article. So that's to help them be a consumer of research. They do a midterm exam, which focuses on the logics of causal inference and research designs that support causal inferences in different ways, and on research interpretation. And they have an empirical research paper that they write. They can use qualitative or quantitative data. They can collect their own data, since a lot of them work in schools. They have a lot of data that they can use, or they can use public data sets, and that's where they usually need the most support, but every year some students do great projects using public data sets. So here are my 3 lessons learned. We learned last semester, the pilot semester, they want more synchronous. They want it to be just as much like the ground class as possible. If anything, I think we should beef up the amount of time, and I didn't see that coming. I thought people take it online because they want async, they want to work at their own pace. It's a correspondence course, that's what they want. That's not what they want. They want something that's just the same as live, face-to-face, in person. So we've got to move stuff away from async towards sync, and we're kind of tweaking that as we go. So more guided practice, more live mini lectures instead of online lectures. Okay, software supports, and Mohamed, you mentioned that you have to do tutoring with the students, and even with Excel, Excel has not been a major challenge in the ground course. Some students struggle with Excel, but the students help each other. They're sitting right next to each other, and I'm doing it at the front of the room, and then I'm circulating, and they're helping each other. Plus, we have CTRL here, which will help students on a drop-in basis if they have questions about software, about research technology. So online has been a different story. It's harder to help your neighbor because you can screen share only in one direction. So it's harder to work and have your neighbor work alongside you, it's harder for the instructor to jump in and out and help everybody with troubleshooting. So the instructor ends up doing more one-on-one tutoring and recording little videos on her own time that she can post. Of course, there are Linda videos that we offer at AU, but software support needs are an ongoing challenge, and I think it's a challenge for AU as we move forward because our live students have drop-in CTRL support. CTRL has said they will do dial-in support, but it's a capacity issue. Okay, so finally, I think as we moved everything online, we thought of this as you write the course once and you make it foolproof so that anybody can hop in and teach it. And the reality is the instructor, if you're moving toward a model where sync is important, instructor capacity and instructor skills are still just as important as in a ground class. So this is really key. We have a wonderful instructor who taught last semester. She's taught in our programs before. She's a qualitative researcher. So learning and being comfortable with the quantitative material was a challenge for her. And I think a lot of the other instructors that teach are really quants are going to, maybe have a challenge in the other direction. So this is really tricky. But what we have learned is that because this class has an independent research project, I've supervised people to teach it on the ground as well. If you have a qualitative researcher teaching the course, they're going to push, they're going to guide students toward qualitative projects. If you have a quant teaching the course, they're going to guide students toward quantitative projects. And really, you want a balance where students feel comfortable in both and are able to choose. So I think that the takeaway is that this is highly instructor dependent, even though we try to make it as supportive for the instructors as possible. And those are basically our lessons thus far. And I think we'll turn it over to the audience.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for listening.
So we had a session earlier this morning about universal design and thinking about how to make content accessible to learners who may have come from different language backgrounds. Obviously, online, this is particularly an issue, even though the majority come from within a 50-mile radius of our university. We do have in our core programs, for example, we do have learners who are in Thailand or other places. How are you, so on top of having to figure out how to think through qualitative and quantitative methods, you may also have linguistic challenges, how or other kinds of learning barriers. How do you think about that? Are they greater? Are they lessened in the context of quantitative and qualitative methods? Is it easier to learn quantitative methods, for example, regardless of your background? Or how are you dealing with the different nationalities and language barriers?
I started my teaching career teaching at a historically disadvantaged institution in South Africa. I remember once talking to a student about a methods book. He wanted to do his PhD, and I was talking to him about perhaps purchasing this methods book. And he looked at me and he said, "But Professor Peters, I already own 3 books." And I thought, wow, this is the reality of this student. So, yeah, I've been teaching students from other cultures for a long time, and so I think I've developed those cross-cultural communication skills that I can use in a face-to-face or in an online environment. I think for me, the challenge isn't approaching a student from another culture. The challenge is students in class interacting with each other if they're from other cultures, and the problems that they can have with each other. I had a student once talking about research in different cultures make the comment, well, it's all the same. We all just do the same things in business. And, everybody else in class was like, no, we don't. And so it's more in mediating the discussion between people. As an instructor, just taking the time. The courses that I teach are very time intensive because it is a lot of doing a method and reflecting on yourself and then Skyping with a student and talking about that. So I'm able to make each student feel as if they're learning the material. But I think the challenge is just that interaction between students.
Well, I mean, what lessens the impact of this issue is the fact that from week one, I mean, our starting assignment was to introduce themselves, and a sense of community is created instantly because they come to recognize that they all come from kind of similar backgrounds and interests in terms of their profession and what they hope to do with this course. And usually they're program managers. Some of them have done evaluation research. Right now, because now we opened the courses to different tracks, different disciplines, we get a mix. We started with students who were mainly focused on international development. So they can be in Africa, in Haiti, in any parts of the world, in Europe, everywhere, and in the US. Now we're getting domestic students who are working with NGOs or government agencies across the country on domestic programs. But they all are attuned to the requirements of what it needs to do evaluation research, pursuing it quantitatively. So we don't face, obviously the language of instruction is English. So if they have a language barrier, it shows. And those particular students I worked with a couple of students who had this issue, and you just have to work with them individually. But for most, I mean, I don't recall this has been like a major issue for overwhelming majority of the students.
I think where the challenge would come in is if you wanted to do those synchronous sessions like you do. I might have to Skype with somebody at 11 o'clock at night because that's the only time they're available because they're in Afghanistan. And I can't expect everyone in my classes to be online at the same time. So I definitely, and we've thought about using synchronous sections, but it's very difficult when you've got that international classroom to be able to expect everyone to be online at the same time.
I think because our program focuses on ed policy and we're explicit that we cover international issues, but our primary focus is on U.S. ed policy. We have had some international applicants, but I think those are folks that want to learn about U.S. and the ed concept. They want to learn about the U.S. context and apply it to another situation at those contexts. So that's a real difference in terms of the students that you're serving.
I'm a graduate student. I did my whole undergrad and my master's online, and I'm doing a master's of science in educational technology at Hopkins. And her question is something that we just covered, and I was able to design a course on course sites. And there is translation technology that the student could purchase. I don't know how that works. I've never bought it, but that is available. If someone is in, say, Africa, and I'm doing a statistics course, and they need the information translated into their language, they can purchase that technology, and the technology will translate the language for them. So that's something they can do, and offering, the UDL, offering the information in different ways. That could help, because I could watch like a movie with English subtitles. That could you can teach that way as well. So I just learned that last semester, but I'm not a teacher.
Do you know what the software is called?
I didn't look into it that far, but I know it's definitely available because it was in the book, so we were studying that.
As a fellow from Moldova, I hear Fulbright professor, and want to say that I have some problem with language. I speak English only 2 years old, but I want to say I'm not really rich. I support your ideas, but first of all, we non-speaker English need to be interested to adopt our English. And every day I feel here support, like professors, students. When I say sorry for my English, the professor said, no, your English is good, and I'm interested to adopt my English. Because it's my problem that I don't know good English, and I need every day to teach, to adopt my English, and be more involved in teaching projects and research projects. This is all. Thank you.
I think as well, when we put our own lectures online, we always have lecture scripts that you post as well. So that someone that needs to read it, for whatever reason, can read those lecture scripts rather than just have a video. And if you notice the video of me and Julie talking, there was closed captions there as well. So that's important to reach students.
I just had a question about the social learning piece in the online module where we were doing synchronous or asynchronous. And so what does that look like in research methods when you have kind of peer-to-peer learning and you're facilitating those discussion groups or conversations online? And then I also had a question about with online content, you might want to limit the amount of reading that you're assigning and have other modes of learning. So Ben, thank you for showing the video that you use and kind of the insights there. What other kinds of resources are you using in research methods so that students have more than the textbook and the research article to kind of learn the methods?
I mentioned I'm using tutorials.
Belinda.
Yeah, belinda.com, and I also post videos of me doing a mock assignment on the weekly practice.
It's a screen capture?
It's a video. It's a video that was that is available as supplemental material for students. So they can go and see how I did with the project I proposed and doing the weekly assignment, and they apply whatever they learn into their own research.
In terms of students working together, I think, so with Zoom, I never truly, when we started this, I didn't know that something like Zoom existed. I've been in, many Adobe meetings and GoTo meetings, and it was not like Zoom. So I give full credit to Zoom. They can jump into small groups, the professor can jump in and out, the students can record their small group discussions, and so that is transformative according to the instructor who has done it with the students. The other thing we do is conventional threaded discussions where we mandate you post the first time by Wednesday, you respond to at least 2 people by Sunday, and I think that's more artificial and maybe not something that will stick with over the long haul.
I think for me, it's creating that group dynamic at the beginning of the class so that we're all in this together. We can learn from each other. Everyone has a perspective that's important. And so in terms of creating that dialogue, during that first introductory section, they bring something up, and even if I have to do research on it, I will somehow link and show that what they're saying is really important, so that they feel value, that they can add value to that. I'm teaching a class now in professional ethics, and one of the students is a sports student. He started talking about some of the problems and the corruption in sports. So I spent a couple of hours reading about corruption in basketball, and so I was able to write back to him and have a pretty good answer to what he was talking about, and it made him feel as if, wow, okay, I do have something to add to this class, which is dominated by healthcare and evaluation students. So it's figuring out what each person can add to it, adding value to that, and creating that group dynamic that we're all in this together. We need to deconstruct this material together, doing those weekly summaries to where you point out, so-and-so had something really great to say this week. Look at that person's post, look at her post, and creating that group dynamic. In terms of lectures, I do case study lectures, and I found rather than just talking about how to do research, if I can apply methods to a case study, it helps students to see it a little bit more. So in these case study lectures, what I do
Nigeria, leadership initiatives contributes to employment and increased incomes through the support of a fish farming project. This project is particularly suited to the village, as fish farming is relatively drought tolerant. As part of leadership initiatives' efforts to plan, monitor, and evaluate the project, the organization carried out several different kinds of interviews, including unstructured, semi-structured, and structured interviews.
So I go on to talk about these kinds of interviews and how the organization used them. This is the text of it in case anyone needs. Rather than just talking about these different kinds of interviews, I related back to what Leadership Initiatives was doing in Nigeria and kind of deconstruct it. So it helps the students, and it's just more interesting for the students as well. The footage came from a former student that's actually the executive director now of Leadership Initiatives, and he sent me a disc or a drive with probably 3 or 4 hours of material. So I was able to cut and paste it and put it together for a lot of the lectures in my class. So it's geared specifically towards my class, and it helps the students to deconstruct. They feel more connected to it because it's not something that I pulled off of YouTube, but it just becomes a more engaging process. These kind of videos take a long time to produce though.
Yeah, we did not budget. Because we worked with these external partners, we did not have a video component, and I think we feel that was the right decision because it's moving. Synchronous seems to be what students like, but I do think it's still a question for me whether we should have invested in videos.
These were I made on my own time. I'm a full-time professor, so I'm able to dedicate time to doing this. I think you have to be pretty dedicated as an adjunct to spend 3 or 4 or 5 hours putting together a video.
In our case, synchronous simply is not an option. Teaching people all across the globe with full-time positions that they want to cross the line.
I would just add to that though that we are looking into, you can have synchronous components, but it may require you as the Peters was saying, we have to do it at 11 p.m. at night or at some hour that may not work necessarily. You might be in your pajamas when you're doing it.
It only matters from here up.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
It's very challenging.
The other thing that we have looked at is not just synchronous content, but then combining it with optional inclusions, so that you then invite people to come together. Because the other thing that we learned is not only that they want synchronous, but that they also in fact want an on-campus connection. So surprisingly, you will get online students who want to participate in commencements when they finish. And they want to come to campus and have that opportunity to buy stuff at the bookstore or whatever. So one can complement the online learning with a face-to-face learning.
And I think if Jeff had been here, that's what he was going to talk about, was that the students in Kogod, as part of their SRP project, they need that one-on-one with the professor, but that practicum experience is really important for them to connect with the campus, to connect with each other.
I think we're looking at a student market that is so diverse in terms of need, in terms of time availability, and so yeah, we probably can get more enrollment if we diversify our offerings.
This is something that is, I do think is, I think some of the decisions that we made maybe were because we're a school of education, and so our folks are very committed to the idea of the classroom community, and because a lot of our students, as you said, are kind of local, but 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 we've learned so much from the students that aren't local. Like they really have brought such interesting perspectives that, you know, typically our students teach in and around the District of Columbia. So, you know, our students kind of have a homogeneous experience, and the students that are in other parts of the country just bring a very different perspective, a rural perspective. And so I think that enriches it, but I do think that there's this tension between how do you define your market, how do you go after your market, and that determines, this is a great case in point, it determines how you structure these courses.
I experienced that because I live stream a lot. So when I live stream, I mean, I watch live stream, I log in and I look at people in the world, and the whole world is active. So what is it in Australia? It's a certain time here. So I'm learning that the most people on the planet are up at a certain time of day.
What time of day is it?
It's sort of like in that, like Eastern time, it'll be like afternoon, because if it's 2 o'clock, it's like 8 o'clock in Russia, but it goes over to Japan. So you have, you know, so something like that, you know, you get the drift, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, when I call online for synchronous, I will have, it's like summer session course. You know, we have people that are working waitressing at night, or they're, you know, they have 9 to 5 jobs. So I figured it's easier for me to have multiple times. So and they may be shorter time links, but you get the synchronous thing at maybe 9 o'clock at night and then 8 in the morning the next day, and they can choose that.
You do it twice?
I do it twice, yeah, because I figure it's easier for me to be more flexible than the whole group of them. And so, and I actually try to do their testing before they actually have the session, so I know that all of them have read the material. And then the flipped classroom discussion is much stronger for us. But they like that. I mean, it's, you might only get a smaller group, but then you also get small groups, which is good.
How many of you guys teach research methods right now? And how many, so 3, so how many of you guys teach online or have taught online?
So I will teach research methods online for the first time this spring.
In which,
Sociology.
oh, cool. Yeah.
But I've taught it in the classroom for 10 years. And so that's a new, interesting, like, switch.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to put in a little plug, this is the qualitative research methods series that I write. And if you go down here, there's articles on a variety of different topics, from free lists to using card sorts to interviewing, focus groups. These are just little 2 to 3 page articles. They're very pointed, very how-to. These are some of the criticisms, some of the tips of the trade. I've found that my students will understand these short articles and be able to digest them a little easier than a 10-page paper on how to do an interview.
Where do those live?
They are on the measurement and evaluation program page. It's programs online at American.edu. If you were just to Google Beverly Peters qualitative research methods, it would come up.
Thank you.
I was just going to throw out there, so I work in the School of International Service and oversee our online graduate degrees there, and all of our classes have required synchronous components. And after 5 years of experimentation, the time blocks that we found to be most amenable to the largest swath of students is between 7 and 10:30 p.m. Eastern, and between 9 a.m. and noon on Saturdays. We have students in 15 different time zones at the moment. We have a huge percentage of U.S. military personnel, so we, particularly in East Asia and in Western Europe, we've got a lot of students who can't make sort of Eastern time, evening U.S., and we find that Saturday mornings are very, very helpful for them.
So what were the time frames?
Between 7 and 10:30 p.m. Eastern on weekdays, so Monday through Thursday, and then 9 a.m. to 12 noon on Saturday.
That's great. That's great.
And we also, as Carla was saying, we in SIS we made a decision that all students are required to do an immersive component on campus. So all of our online students, regardless of where they are in the world, have to come to campus for an in-person experience during the program. And when we started our degrees a number of years ago, we had that as an optional experience, but we quickly made it required, as we found that the students who participated were far more engaged and persisted and maintained at much higher rates. So we started making that an expectation.
Do they pay for that separately, or are you embedding that in the tuition?
It's embedded within the curriculum, so it's sort of a standard tuition credit for however many credits it is, and then there's an associated program fee because we sort of cater the whole experience in terms of meals and transportation and stuff like that.
How long is the session?
So we do 15-week sessions, which is different than some of the other programs represented here. So to get our contact hours, we do 2 hours and 40 minutes per week, and 80, so that's 160 minutes. 80 minutes is asynchronous, 80 minutes is synchronous.
I was talking about the immersive.
Oh,
part. How long is that?
so-
Is that a set session time?
So there is, they're either between 3 and 5 days.
Well, in the interest of lunch, I think that we have to break, but thanks very much for joining us and sharing your story.